A pleasure to me all at last. And now, we are at it once again with HJN Season 5. But, we believe it or not, have our final contender for the likes of, well, tons of franchises that I've been doing lately. And of all choices that I could go on ahead and pick, I went ahead and picked Toy Story. Yeah, so while we have talked about a good handful of Disney-related franchises, something that's more Pixar-oriented could at least be thrown into the mix here, because why not? Well, what is there for me to talk about based on Toy Story, other than what I have talked about? Well, first off, we do have ourselves 4 films, of which I've already made individual videos for, but I guess it's best that we go on ahead and recap on this whole thing. Something I hadn't quite addressed yet, though, is the fact that the concept for Toy Story goes even further back than 1995, with the first movie's release, directed by John Lasseter and starring the likes of Tom Hanks, Tim Allen, Wallace Shawn, Don Rickles, and of course Eric Von Detten. The concept for Toy Story alone first came along as a unique wonder for Pixar wanting to create their very first film after their string of unique short films that were prevalent throughout the 1980s. One of the first of which was known as The Adventures of Wally B, which of course I'm sure would have been the idea for Buzz, since B's of course Buzz, and as for the name Wally, well, that carried on well into 2008 for the film Wall-E. So, Buzz, Wall-E, The Adventures of Andrew and B. Yeah. So, I don't know if there's much coincidence to that, or if it's just an interesting connection that I pointed out. Anyways, though, after all the string of shorts that they did, especially with 1986's Luxo Jr., 1987's Red's Dream, and 1988's, well, Tin Toy, alongside many other unique projects that would carry on well throughout the rest of that decade in particular, 1991 was seen as one of the first big steps in which that Pixar would do in an effort to create their first ever cinematic masterpiece. It took years for them to complete, a number of rewrites and a number of retools, but the final product came out to be one of the biggest things about the 90s. It was truly a date that would seal the fate for the future of filmmaking, because a future where CG could potentially be the next big thing to all those flat hand-drawn animation stuff. I mean, the usage of computers was more or less the future. And it wasn't just because of Pixar's succession, but also that same year in 1995, a lot of people would talk about how Microsoft and Apple would truly start taking on the home computer industry, alongside many others. Even though home computers had already been a thing for a long time now, it was the mid-90s, especially with Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and many other figures, that were truly pushing the marks and the limits of computing and processing. Because of Toy Story's mass success, critically and financially, in 1995, they truly set up the future for filmmaking. Throughout the rest of the 90s, while it wouldn't be nearly as common from other purveyors, such companies like DreamWorks, which was, of course, started by former Disney executives like Jeffrey Katzenberg, whom, the following year after Toy Story's release in 1996, ended up resigning from the Walt Disney Company because of his former boss, Michael Eisner, who was at the time the CEO of the company itself, had to let him know that he wasn't getting some promotion. Yeah, there's an entire story on that Defunct Land had of course talked about, which of course correlated to an infamous late 90s project called Club Disney. But in any other case though, DreamWorks would actually try their hand at it a few times, at first with the 1998 film Ants, and eventually adapting a couple of unique Christian stories from the books of Exodus and Genesis. But of course, we know that in 2000, they would begin some good success, with the 2000 film The Road to El Dorado, starring Kenneth Branagh and Kevin Kline. But of course, the year before, and even the same year as Ants and The Prince of Egypt, 1998 also brought along another well-known Pixar film, A Bug's Life. But the following year after that, because of the success of A Bug's Life, they were able to, in fact, push for marketing to allow for a new film to come around, a sequel to Toy Story 2, only 4 years after the first film's release. But it still held up in its unique way. The first one, of course, did bring along a unique tone that many other films that were animated or meant for kids couldn't really take a hold of. It had the unique mixture of some thriller aspects in it that I'm sure Michael Jackson would have been proud of at the time, along with some elements of dark humor put into it as well. Because after all, one of the main antagonists in the first Toy Story film was a crazy teenager with braces, and of course was practically in the middle of puberty, with the unique signs, of course, including things like locked doors, torturing and mutilating toys, including ones from his own sister, even feeding some to his dog, Scud, whom I am sure is a bull terrier. But what does the second film show for it? Well, it doesn't really bring along a lot of the dark humor and scary twists to it that the first film did with all the mutant toys and stuff, like, ugh. But the second film did at least bring along a couple of unique elements. It had 2 antagonists instead of just one, which technically the first film kind of did so because Sid and Scud proved to be an unstoppable force, even on the move to Andy's new house. But the second film gave us, at first, a greedy toy collector by the name of Al McWiggins, who was made infamous, especially when the toys were watching those commercials on TV for Al's Toy Barn. This was, of course, something that had been previously referenced in the first film a couple of different times. One advertisement in particular did showcase a Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger doll, whom, of course, is not a flying toy. And that, of course, is how Buzz Lightyear himself came to the realization he might not be a real Space Ranger after all, as Woody kept on telling him even. And the second film, of course, did allow for Buzz Lightyear's character development to truly peak out here, because upon realizing that Woody and his friends need him, and upon realizing that he himself is just a toy owned by Andy, even, of course, having his own name being written on Buzz's foot. The thing is that Toy Story 2 does things quite a bit differently here, with Woody being kidnapped by Al McWiggins at a yard sale that accidentally allows for some friends, including a character named Wheezy, to be brought up for sale. Not to mention, the stakes really do become raised here, because this is a moment in which that it takes place well in the city, as opposed to it being in a suburb where Andy himself currently lives. By the end of the film, though, we do get ourselves a second antagonist, a member of Woody's roundup known as Stinky Pete, the prospector, who, of course, was made famous by his voice being made by Kelsey Grammer. Al McWiggins, of course, was also pretty good as well, because Wayne Knight, the same man himself, would eventually be the voice for Zurg, whom, while not exactly present in Toy Story 2, would actually turn up in the unique spin-off called Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, which first would air the following year in 2000. So, just think about it. We're only in the first 5 years of the franchise here. But, believe it or not, there wouldn't be another Toy Story film for over 10 years. Some announcements would come around along with some concept art and writing based on a possible third film being released by 2005, which would have marked the 10-year anniversary of the franchise so far, and the original concept for the third film was actually pretty unique. It was a time in which that Buzz and the former mentioning of made in Taiwan could be seen in his communicator in the lid where he opens it up after seeing the Buzz Lightyear commercial in the first film. It says he was made in Taiwan. And there was actually a factory in Taiwan in which that he would be shipped to after experiencing a supposed manufacturing defect. The original script that they put together did allow for the toys to once again go on an excursion, but as opposed to the second film, which saw them going from Andy's house to a certain building in the middle of the city in the so-called Tri-County region, as it's uniformly called, they have to go all the way to Taiwan, which either means going by ship or even by plane. So, again, the stakes in this case are even higher than what you might expect. And while that might not have worked out so well here, it just seems that logic wouldn't really have followed all so much here. On top of that, there was a bit of an ending in which that Buzz Lightyear would unfortunately not go back with the toys at all. Kind of similar to what happens in the second film when Woody refuses to go back after realizing that he could be a valuable asset to the likes of the Roundup gang. I mean, being sold to a Tokyo-based toy museum? That was like something he never would have been able to do alone. And upon realizing the fact that what happened to his arm when it got ripped accidentally by his own owner, Andy, he came to the self-realization that, of course, Andy was no longer gonna really like playing around with him, especially if there was a chance that he could end up with more damage. One more rip, Andy would be done with him. So we know that that had changed around after eventually coming to another realization that Andy, he can't be stopped from being grown up and all that. But in all cases though, the third film just never really happened here. And this was mostly because of a certain animation studio called Circle 7, which eventually filed for bankruptcy and would close down for good. So the original Toy Story 3 would never see the light of day. And there was also a sequel to Monsters, Inc., which actually did see the character Boo being all grown up and recognizing her old friend Sully. That would have been awesome. But hey, somebody actually made it a reality years later. I'm not really going to tell you who, but I could at least allude to it. But we'll move on to the actual third film, which actually came out in 2010. Yeah, the best year ever. Got pretty much the best movie that they could have ever possibly made. And it also was the most successful that Pixar ever had. Like, even more so than the other two films put together. Seriously, the box office alone overshadowed the other two films by miles. And what is that about, really? Well, as even Stinky Pete put together, Andy's gonna grow up one day, and the toys are gonna spend eternity rotting in some landfill, as he himself infamously states by the end of the second film. With the third film, we pretty much see the gang, as they're known as in the franchise, being sent off to a daycare after Andy is preparing to leave for college, and his sister, well, Molly, as she's known as, she also eventually is going to be making her way to school. And while not many things are going to be hand-me-downs for her, she does have herself a Barbie, believe it or not. It's very much like the Barbie that we might have seen in the second film, the one that acted like a tour guide for Al's Toy Barn. But who really knows what happened at that point? Anyways though, when the toys do make their way over there, as some sort of confusion was put together. They at first thought they were put on the curb in a garbage can, when Woody supposedly found out it was just some sort of error, and the others didn't realize it until, believe it or not, Mrs. Potato Head, whom first came around as a shock to Mr. Potato Head, that she finally came around as a Christmas gift for Andy in the first film. She apparently had her eye missing, and apparently it was underneath Andy's dresser the whole time. So she takes a look at it and finds out Andy is missing the other toys. And his mom confesses that they might have been taken to the daycare. So, if that's not surprising to you at all, why don't we talk a bit about Lotso Huggin' Bear. Voiced by Ned Beatty, he of course is seen as the main antagonist for the third film, a somewhat huggable bear who smells like strawberries, but even some of his old friends, including Chuckles the Clown, whom was actually taken by a young girl named Bonnie. Yeah, so I don't know if it was original or maybe inspired by something else. Either way you look at it though, when Woody pays a bit of a visit to Bonnie's place, he actually came to the conclusion, especially when looking upon the address for 1225 Sycamore Lane, which apparently is the address for Andy's house. It's right around the corner, according to a map that he found out. And by the end of the film though, after all the crazy stuff that happens, with Lotso and his own minions basically turning the daycare into a massive prison camp for the toys to escape and eventually get caught into a trash compactor that eventually empties out in a landfill, It's just as the prospector in the second film had stated. They're going to spend eternity there and will likely be forgotten. Probably even by Andy, despite what happened earlier. But thankfully, fate allows for them to come on back. And eventually, while Lotso gets his own punishment, we do see the toys heading to Bonnie's place. The ending of this film supposedly brought us what could have been seen as the true ending of the franchise. After all, with the gang being at Bonnie's house, a somewhat new permanent place for them to be at, and especially when you couple up with the Toy Story tunes that would start off in 2011 with the short known as Small Fry, and several others that would come out in the following 3 years, it pretty much seemed like the movies were going to an end. But as far back as 2015, I recall when they supposedly had plans for a fourth film, set to make a release in 2017. But with a handful of delays, and a good handful of other films that would come around in the following 3 years, Toy Story 4 would finally see the light of day in June 2019, 9 years after the third film. Now, how does this one do? Well, first off, Bonnie adjusts to grade school after her days in the likes of being at a daycare and eventually through kindergarten. The thing is, though, is that starting her grade school years was a bit tough. Woody eventually came around and helped create a new accompaniment for her in the form of Forky. Yeah, Tony Hale, of course, voices the unique character in this film, but Forky is more determined to go into the trash can rather than to be Bonnie's friend and company, especially when they're going on a road trip. It's a unique little change of pace here, going from a daycare to a road trip that supposedly leads to a small town in which that the RV ends up out of service for some time. So, Bonnie and company, including her family and all the gang, basically come around to a small carnival as well as an antique shop in which that our next antagonist comes around, Gabby Gabby, as well as her ventriloquist dummies. Yeah, so some might not think of it as a good approach to the franchise, especially with the supposed book ending of the third film, but I quite honestly enjoyed this. I felt like it was more or less like a reboot to the franchise in which that, while not everybody would have needed it, I feel like it was needed because it was like revisiting an old world in which that the toys are like our own friends, and we hadn't seen them in almost a full decade. But unless you're willing to count the Toy Story That Time Forgot, which actually came out in 2014, 5 years before the film, and when you really think about it though, the announcements of the fourth film really came around in 2015, 1 year after the Toy Story That Time Forgot, you could really think about the fact that the franchise had been talked about pretty much every single year. But as we know, despite what the ending gave us, and with a good handful of new characters, including the reintroduction of Bo Peep, and of course the returning actor of hers, Annie Potts. But the thing is though, Woody and Buzz basically separated from each other by the end of the fourth film. So right there, you got yourself a possible lid opening here. And I have talked a bit about a possible concept for a Toy Story 5, and the fact is that I would have considered that 2023 could have been seen as a possible release date for it, but I guess much like how Toy Story 4 had been held back for a little while, we do finally have an upcoming release for Toy Story 5, supposedly coming by the end of this summer. So, we definitely have something to look forward to. But I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to go whining in the comments and telling me some things like you don't want the franchise to continue, you don't want any more films, you don't want any more bookending titles leading to a false ending of which. But let me tell you something. Toy Story is not just a franchise. It's something far beyond that. It's the reason why CG was even put into film in the first place. And I know, CG in film had already been a thing for some time, mostly in small increments. but Toy Story was the true thing that made CGI-based cinema a reality. A door that is now wide open. And we've seen millions of other films put together. I mean, it's no wonder CG is just so much more cost-effective and economic when you really put it into function. I mean, think about it. I practically got my fix by watching Elio, which came out last summer, but the truth is that I feel like it's the best new film that Pixar's made so far. And don't worry, I have nothing against Inside Out 2, but just as with many people might not being a fan of sequels, Inside Out 2 does get in the places of world building and also the introduction of supposed modern life problems, anxiety, envy, humiliation, and other things. But let's be real here. Toy Story 5 is going to be an event. Much like what we saw with the last Indiana Jones film, we are certainly going to be seeing something far beyond the norm here. And I'm sure to say, it's going to be awesome. End of story. So, maybe if they get to, let's say, Toy Story 47, then I might start feeling a little tired. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Maybe it'll be the year 2514 by the time the 47th film even comes around. That is if Pixar even exists. We'll just have to wait and see. Well, in any case though, that's it for franchises. And it was a pretty good one too that I ended things off with. And I spent a bit of a while talking about it as well. In any other case though, I'm going to be taking another week off here. Because let's face it, these HDN episodes were pretty big. Of all the ones that I've done so far. But I'll come around, believe it or not, with an official thing regarding what's in the background.